Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be creating a Swift package that is a server project, and we're going to add OpenAPI Generator to it. Now, if you've never used or even heard of OpenAPI before, it is an amazing product that Apple created that allows us to automatically have servers and types and even clients built automatically just based on the code that we've written. If you're ready to take your Swift knowledge to the next level and move from the front end of building mobile apps to the back end, this is the video for you. Stay tuned. All right, we are ready to go through this documentation and build our server from a Swift package. So it says, this tutorial guides you through building a greeting service, an API server for a fictitious service that returns a personalized greeting. The API for the service is defined using OpenAPI, and you'll create a Swift server for this service from scratch. Your Swift package will make use of the Swift OpenAPI Generator plugin to generate the code you'll use to implement this API. Sounds cool. Let's get started. So it says step 1, create a new directory. So let's do that. I've got my terminal open over here on the next page. All right, so let's jump into terminal and start running with step 1. So mkdir, that stands for make directory greeting service, which means we are making a folder called a greeting service. Step 2, create a new package using the Swift Package Manager CLI. So let's copy that code across. There we go. And then it says open the package in Xcode using the open command. So let's scroll back over and we will have it open the package for us. There we are, and now we've got our package open, so let's move that off to the side here. Nice, and now we've got our package open and ready to go. Let's move on to the next section here. So it says this is configuring your project to use Swift OpenAPI Generator. Let's extend this sample package to implement our greeting service API. So we want to copy the OpenAPI document into the sources directory and name it openapi.yaml. So let's do that. Let's create a new file with command +n, and we'll choose an empty other file here. And let's copy our code. There we are, and we'll paste it in. And then let's rename our file to be openapi.yaml. All right, and then what is step 2? So step 2, we also need a config file that controls the behavior of the Swift OpenAPI Generator plugin. Create a file in the same directory called OpenAPI Generator config.yaml with the following contents. Okay, let's do that. Let's copy our code. Go back to the sources directory and press Command N and look for an empty other file here. There we are. And we will paste in that code and we'll name it OpenAPI-generator-config.yaml and hit enter. There we go. And then step 3, specify the minimum platforms the package supports. So we will go over to our package file here and we will add the platform to our package just like so, and we'll highlight that and press Ctrl+I to fix that indentation. And then step 4 says then we will add the package dependencies. So we've added dependencies on the generator package plugin, which generates code at build time, the runtime package, which allows us to make use of the generated code, and because Swift OpenAPI Generator has been built with an extensible transport abstraction, a concrete transport implementation library. Here we've selected the transport implementation that uses the Vapor Web framework. So let's copy our dependency list here and let's paste that in. Again, we'll select that and press Ctrl+I to fix the indentation issues. There we are. And then step 5. Now we can update our target to make use of the Swift OpenAPI Generator plugin. Okay, so let's add our name and plugin to our executable target. So we've already got our name, so let's just add the plugins. So let's add our comma here, and new line, and add our plugins. And again, we'll select that, press Ctrl-I to fix the indentation. There we are. And then step 6 says, next, we need to declare the runtime dependencies for our target. All right, so let's do that. Let's copy our runtime dependencies here. And we will add them below our name and above the plugins. There we go. Step 7 says, build the project now to ensure it's configured correctly. The Swift OpenAPI Generator build plugin gets built and generates the server stubs for the greeting service behind the scenes, making them available to use in the next section. Nice, and as we can see, Swift has already started trying to build our project for us. So we'll give it just a second to let it do its thing. And just like that, we're back, thanks to the superpower of video editing. And if your computer is like mine, that probably took just a little bit of time to go through, but we're here now. All right, so it looks like the build was successful. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, and the next section. So we will use the generated code in our target. Now we're ready to use the code that the plugin generated behind the scenes to serve some personalized greetings. Cool. So it says navigate to the sources/main.swift file, which is the entry point for our program. So let's do that. Currently, it just prints hello world to the console. We'll make changes to this file to make use of the code that was generated by the plugin to implement the greeting service. Okay, so it says step 2, define a new type that conforms to the generated protocol. The compiler requires us to provide a function called getGreeting. So let's do that. We will say that we want to import, and we don't have to type all this code. We could just copy it and save ourselves some time. So let's do that. We'll copy and paste our code in. There we go. And then it says to create a new Vapor application and use your handler implementation to populate the routes the server will respond to. All right, and so we will copy the code here too. There we are. And then it says run the server and test with curl. So let's run our server, and we've chosen to run it on our Mac. So let's just hit play. There we go. Now they're suggesting that we could use curl to do this, but we covered Postman in a recent video. So let's go ahead and open up Postman and see if we can hit this endpoint with Postman instead. So let's open up Postman here, and then we don't need this API test workspace. Let's create a new collection and call this Greeting Service API. There we go, and we'll add a request. And this will be a request for get a greeting. And it will be a request to this URL. And it should come back with a message that says, hello, Jane. So let's give that a shot and try it out. Nice, it was successful, and our message says, hello, Jane. Very cool. Now, as we can see, it looks like name is a query parameter, and it went ahead and added Jane as the value for that query parameter for us. Nice. All right, let's get this out of the way and move down to our next step in the directions. Section 4, adding a new API operation. Finally, let's extend our API by adding a new operation to the OpenAPI document and server. The new operation will return a random emoji that represents a type of greeting. Okay, so it says navigate to the openapi.yaml and add the getEmoji operation by defining a new path /emoji with method get. Note this operation uses text plain as the content type for its response. So we will scroll down and we will add the /emoji endpoint to our path. So let's paste that there. And then we need to update the indentation by just moving these objects back a little bit here. And it looks like I didn't quite get where we needed to go. So this is only 2 spaces away, so we'll add 1, 2. There we are. All right, and now that should be valid YAML, so we will save this. And then it says recompile the project. Compilation fails in main.swift. So let's go ahead and let's recompile the project. And we'll hit play again. So it says recompiling fails in main.swift because our implementation does not provide a handler for our new operation. The Swift compiler informs us that the greeting service API implementation does not conform to API protocol and guides us to add the missing function. So let's click here and let's see what it says. Yep, does not conform to the protocol, and so let's have it add that for us. Nice. And so we will add the missing function to the handler. So there we go. So we could just copy this and paste it in here. And then we'll highlight that and use Control-I, fix our indentation again. And now it says run the server and test the new operation. So let's do that. Let's run the server. Okay, it says it's running. And let's see what this endpoint is. This is /API/emoji. So we'll go back to Postman and we will duplicate this and we will call this endpoint get an emoji. And the URL is this URL and then /emoji. And let's send that request and see what we get. Nice, we got a waving hand. And that happens to be the same one from the example. I bet if we send it again, we'll get a different one. There we go. Very cool. All right, and that is the end of our instructions. So we have created an OpenAPI generator using a Swift package. Now, right after I stopped recording, I ended up finding another OpenAPI tutorial that actually allows us to see our Swagger documentation. Now, we didn't get to exactly see the Swagger docs, we just saw the OpenAPI docs, and you'll see the difference here in just a second. Let's run through this tutorial too, and let's see what the Swagger docs actually look like in the UI. So jumping down to the first step, it says we need to add an /OpenAPI YAML endpoint. So we'll start with the server init state following the generator server stubs, which we did earlier in this video. And now, in the server package, we will create a directory. So let's go back to our server package. We will create, in the server package, we'll create a /public directory. So let's do that. Let's create a new folder and call it public. There we go. And now we need to move the OpenAPI YAML from the sources and create a symlink to it back in the sources directory. All right. So let's go back to terminal here. And we will move the file from sources to public. We need to go into our greeting service first. So we will say cd into the greeting service. And then now let's run our command. And we keep pressing the up arrow to go back through the history in terminal. And then we'll hit enter. There we go. We have moved the file, and now we will create a symlink. So let's do that. And hit enter. There we are. Okay, now let's check our project and see what that actually did. Okay, now in order to get this to show up for me, I had to quit and reopen Xcode in the meantime. I went ahead and just cut that bit out so you didn't have to wait. But it did move the OpenAPI file, and it created a symlink here. Nice. So now we'll move on to our next step. So in the main.swift, add a Vapor middleware that serves the content of the public directory. So let's do that. Let's copy this line of code here. And we will go to our main.swift, and that's on line 31. So let's see here. So it's below our handler.register, so we'll add that down here. There we go. Now if you're getting build warnings like I was just a second ago, all you have to do to get rid of those is just rebuild your project after you open and close Xcode. It's saying that it can't find certain files, but that's just because it doesn't realize that they've been updated. So all you've got to do, like I said, is just rebuild, and then that should clean that code up. Now, step 4, from the product menu, select Scheme and then Edit Scheme. So let's do that. So let's go up to Product and choose Scheme and Edit Scheme. There we are. And then with Run selected in the sidebar, so we'll select Run, we will select the Options tab and check the box labeled Use Custom Working Directory. So let's do that. Let's check the Options tab and find a box labeled Use Custom Working Directory. That's here. There we are. And use the path containing package.swift for this. So let's see if we could do that. We will navigate into our greeting service. And we will choose there we go. That's the path inside our greeting service, and now we have a package.swift inside of there, so let's choose that path. There we are. Okay, this step is necessary because the Vapor middleware serves files relative to the current working directory for the running server process. Okay? And then we will test our endpoint in your browser or using curl. All right, well then let's go ahead and close these, and we will run our project. And let's copy our URL here of localhost 8080. It says it would like to access files, so let's let it do that since we just created those files. And we'll go back and we'll copy our localhost 8080 / openapi.yaml, and now we've got that pasted into our browser, and now we can see our OpenAPI docs. Nice. And so the next step would be adding the Swagger UI. So now that now we'll add a static OpenAPI HTML page that serves Swagger UI and redirect to this page from /OpenAPI for discoverability. So it says that we need to, in step 1, create an openapi.html with the HTML contents as shown on the right. By placing it in the public directory, it's already reachable. Okay, so let's do that. Let's copy our HTML here. And in the public directory, we'll command N to get a new file. And we'll create a new empty file of other. And then we will paste in our code. And we will change this file name to openapi.html. And press enter. There we are. And then step 2 is to add a redirect for OpenAPI to the file that we just created, which serves the rendered documentation. Nice. So we will collect this code down here, and back in our main project, it looks like, below where we created our middleware, we'll add a new line and add the redirect to get OpenAPI to /openapi.html. All right, and then we're ready to move to step 3. And then we need to add a relative server URL to the OpenAPI document. This allows you to use the render documentation to make requests to the instance serving the OpenAPI documentation itself. All right, so we will copy that. And we will go back to our OpenAPI file. And we will add our new server that is a relative server. There we go. Oh, let's bring that back just a little bit. There we are. Indentation is very important in YAML files. And so if that's not exactly lined up, it won't be able to parse it correctly. So let's go ahead and fix that too. All right, and then step 4 says visit localhost :8080/OpenAPI in your browser, which should show you the rendered documentation for the OpenAPI document. All right, let's go over here and let's change our URL. That didn't work. And I think I know why. It's because we haven't rebuilt our project after we ran it just a second ago to see the OpenAPI docs. So let's let it rebuild. Build succeeded. And we will allow it to access the documents folder because we just created our documentation there. Let's refresh our page here. Nice. And this is what the Swagger documentation looks like. Very cool. And as we can see, we have a greet endpoint that takes a name used in returning the greeting, and it has a 200 response that it can return. And we have an emoji endpoint that returns a successful response with an emoji. Very cool. And we also have our server list here that right now just shows only our only server, so that's interesting. And there we have it. We have now moved all the way from OpenAPI docs that were just in the project and a little bit hard to read, all the way to our Swagger API docs, which look much nicer and are easy for anyone to read and figure out how to work with our API. And with that, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you leave a comment, just be nice about it. That's all I ask. And if you found this video helpful, let me know in the comments below. And if you didn't find it helpful, let me know what you're interested in learning more about in the mobile development space. Thanks. Have a great day.